Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about the Commonwealth Cares for Children, otherwise known as C3, and some of the changes that we have put in place for, or planning to put in place for FY25 starting this fall. In this presentation, we will talk through the history of C3, um, the goals that we have for the program, and the specifics of some of the changes we plan for the fall, as well as the timeline for those changes. To start with a little bit of a history of C3, we've had this program in place for 3 years now and have seen how it's served as a vital source of financial stability for the state. Originally, the program was started in 2001 to stabilize programs' operational expenses and maintain capacity for working families during a period of time when there was limited enrollment, which created huge challenges financially for programs. Over time, we found that enrollment returned, but C3 continued to be a powerful source of support for programs in addressing the challenges that they faced in hiring educators by supporting new investments through increased compensation, benefits, and professional development. While at the same time, programs reported that this mitigated the need for tuition and fee increases, even in the face of these rising costs. And we are committed to continuing to sustain and build the quality of services and education that families with young children need to work and thrive through the C3 investments. Over the course of the 3 years, we have collected a great deal of information, both through the program applications for C3 as well as ongoing surveys. And we have seen how license capacity has increased over the time that C3 has been in place, now exceeding pre-pandemic levels. We've also seen how educator compensation has grown during this period, and programs have reported that they've used the funds to maintain affordability for families and do rely heavily in many cases on C3 funding to sustain their operations. So we currently, as we look ahead to the future of this program, have identified a set of goals that guide our work. And we are very pleased to be here today talking about these goals as we have just finished going through the budget process for FY25 and has seen how the legislature, the governor's office, the secretary, and everybody involved have focused on these goals and focused on the work that needs to be done to support these goals for C3. Most importantly, we recognize that C3 is a critical funding mechanism for the early education and care sector. We have seen in the budget language has written C3 into statute, making this program permanent, subject to appropriation. And we have also seen in the budget level funding of C3 and the maintenance of the investment that the state has had to date, as well as a focus on identifying permanent funding sources for this program. Another important principle is the goal of maintaining C3 universality. We recognize that this is an important support for the field's ability to serve working families, to invest in workforce and program quality, and build a system that is more accessible and affordable to families. And to do this effectively, it is important that C3 is available to all programs in our system. We also want to make sure that the distributions from C3 are aligned with expected costs and enrollment to better support all programs, including those serving infants and toddlers, those providing longer hours, and have used cost modeling work that we've done recently to make some adjustments to the program in service of this goal. We also feel that it's important to direct additional funding to programs that serve low and moderate income working families. In particular, we want to be sure we support and incentivize programs to serve children that receive EEC's child care financial assistance. And finally, we recognize that funding predictability is important for everyone. It's important for individual programs to ensure effective budgeting for the year, and it's important for the state for the same purpose. And that is something else that we've looked at ways to ensure we build into the new structures. This slide shows an overview of the current year's budget that supports C3. As I mentioned, funding remains at $475 million, which is the same amount of funding that has been invested in the program in this past year. So we're maintaining the program at the level that we currently have it at, which is exciting and important for this program. The funding comes from two different budget lines you can see here. The first budget line in yellow here provides 300 million for the program and draws that funding from an affordability fund that has been used to fund the program in the last few years, as well as a new iLottery fund that is currently being developed. There is also 175 million from the fair share revenue, which is a new budget line that was added in a few years ago and is designed to support education and transportation, and is in part being used to support C3. The budget also includes a number of outside sections. This is language that defines both the future of C3 looking ahead to FY26 and beyond, as well as some specific language for this current fiscal year. I'll focus here on the requirements from the budget language for C3 in this current fiscal year, but it's important to recognize that we are also paying attention to the future requirements that take place in FY26 and make sure that we are building a system that is responsive to those as well. But currently, we have the requirement that we make sure that we include enrollment in the grant calculations, and in the next slide, I'll talk about how we do that. It also requires that we look at the percentages of C3 funding that goes to different categories of programs. So for those serving greater than 25% of a program's license capacity with children receiving childcare financial assistance, or of low income or other at-risk children, or for Head Start or early Head Start programs, we need to make sure that more than 50.5% of our funds are directed towards those programs. For programs that have at least one child, but not more than 25% of children receiving CCFA, we need to make sure at least 28.4%. So for these two categories, we can go above these benchmarks, but we cannot go below them in how we fund programs. The final category is those programs that do not serve any children receiving CCFA, and we cannot spend more than 21.1% on those programs. So this is a cap rather than a floor like the other budget levels. There is also language that requires that we cap annual funding for a set of for-profit providers operating more than 10 center-based programs in Massachusetts to receive to ensure that each one does not receive more than 1% of the total C3 funding available. And we are looking into how to implement this program, as well as how to use the authority the commissioner has to grant a waiver. This slide shows the basic structure of the C3 formula. I think for those that are familiar with C3 from past years, the parts do not change. We have license capacity multiplied by a base rate, which is then multiplied by a multiplier that is based on a set of tiers that we have developed to create an equity adjustment. License capacity is the first component in this formula, and here is where we build in the enrollment adjustment. Programs that are fully enrolled, we define this as for center-based programs over 75% enrollment, and this is based on an average annual enrollment, not a point in time. So we are going to look back at all the enrollment that we have for every program that's been participating in C3 and develop an average annual enrollment, and then look at how that relates to the overall license capacity of a program. That is less than 75% in a center-based program, the license capacity will be adjusted down by that percentage. For family child care providers, their overall license capacity for the purposes of this formula will remain at 10 for all family child care providers. But if programs enroll less than 3 children on average across a year, then that license capacity will be adjusted down as well. We have also developed a new base rate structure. So there is no longer a base rate multiplied by a staffing adjustment for center-based programs, but we have created a structure based on our cost models that look at the youngest age served in the program and the hours of operation, whether the program is part-time and full-time. And I will talk about those details in a minute. For family child care providers, it remains focused on For family childcare providers, it remains focused on the staffing of the program. And then for the equity adjustment, we've integrated the characteristics of programs that were included in the old equity adjustment, and we've built those into our a new set of program tiers that I will also talk about in a minute. So looking at the base rate and how we structure the base rate, we use the cost models that we have done, and we looked at the ideal staffing that were recommended in those cost models and use that to create program types and a base rate that would be supportive of that particular meeting the cost of that particular program type. For center-based programs, there's a full and a part-time rate. So if a program is operated for less than 25 hours a week, it gets a part-time rate. If it's more than that, it's a full-time rate. And then we look at the youngest group that the program reports serving, both by having children enrolled and by having a classroom available for that age group. And programs get a different rate based on that. And the rate is the same for all licensed slots. We are not paying based on child age. We are just looking at identifying the program type by the youngest age. For family childcare programs, we recognize that the age does not drive staffing in the same way, and programs are really restricted by our licensing regs to a fairly set configuration of ages and limited in terms of the number of infants that they can serve. So in this case, we really do look at the primary cost driver, which is the cost of having an assistant, and continue to ask programs to report on assistance like they have in the past and structure the base rate around assistance in the same way. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Adrienne Murphy, to go through the details of the calculations on the formula.
Great, thanks, Jocelyn. As Jocelyn said, I'm going to share a little bit about the calculations behind the new formula, which, as Jocelyn mentioned, has a same structure, starts with a license capacity, and then a base rate and an equity adjustment as our current formula. And I'll walk through each of the steps of the formula from left to right here today. First, on the left, just like the current formula, the new formula will be rooted in a program's license capacity or the number of children that a program is licensed to serve. The formula starts with the license capacity for center-based programs and a license capacity of 10 for all family childcare programs. This mirrors the current formula and also treats all FCCs similarly. What's distinct and a change moving forward from the current formula is that we will then adjust the license capacity based on enrollment, which is responsive to the budget language. In calculating enrollment here, we're planning to look at a 12-month historical look-back period or a 12-month historical average, which is intended really to buffer programs against changes in enrollment over time. As Jocelyn mentioned before, center-based programs with an average enrollment over the last 12 months of at least 75% will receive the full grant amount. And if a program's average enrollment over the last year is less than 75%, the license capacity will be adjusted accordingly. In the case of family childcare programs, any program that has enrolled on average at least 3 children each month over the past year will receive the full grant amount, and those serving fewer than 3 children over the past year on average will have their grant amount adjusted accordingly. Next, moving from the gray into the blue section here, the program's license capacity is then multiplied by a base rate, which is determined by the key cost drivers for programs, which include, for centers, the youngest age group that a program serves, and for family childcare programs, whether the program employs an assistant. And then the base rate is further adjusted for part-time programs. In their C3 applications, programs will report the number of children served by age group, which we will then use to determine the youngest age group served for center-based programs, and assign a base rate accordingly. For example, a center-based program that serves infants and is open full-time will receive the $100 per seat base rate for all seats, not just those seats filled by infants. In the case of a family childcare program, base rates, as Jocelyn mentioned, will be assigned based on whether the program employs an assistant and whether they employ a full-time assistant or a part-time assistant. And like in the case of center-based care, rates will then further be adjusted for programs that operate part-time, which we define here as less than 25 hours per week, with the exception of school-age programs who receive the $50 base rate. Again, as Jocelyn noted, these base rates are really intended to build on the cost modeling work that EEC has been engaged in over the past few years, and to reflect the key cost drivers that programs face. Moving now from the blue section to the gold section, a program's license capacity and base rate are then multiplied by an equity adjustment, which is designed to account for the population that a program serves. Programs in Tier 1, which include programs that serve at least 25% of their license capacity, with children receiving EEC child care financial assistance, as well as Head Start programs and programs located in a very low opportunity area according to the Child Opportunity Index, will have their grant amounts multiplied by 3. A note here that we'll continue to use the highest percent of children with CCFA served over the past 12 months, just as we do in the current formula, again, to buffer changes in CCFA enrollment over time. Next, programs serving at least one child with childcare financial assistance, but filling less than 25% of their license capacity with children receiving childcare financial assistance, as well as programs that provide substantial non-CCFA scholarships, which we define here as scholarships that cover at least 50% of tuition, and programs that are providing those scholarships to at least 25% of their children will be placed in Tier 2, and their grant amounts will be multiplied by 2.5. A note that this will require additional data collection in the C3 applications, and we're going to ask providers to report the number of children receiving tuition discounts that cover at least 50% of tuition, and upload documentation accordingly. Finally, programs that do not serve children with EEC childcare financial assistance and have not at any point in the past 12 months, and those that do not provide substantial non-CCFA scholarships to at least 25% of children and are not in a very low opportunity area will be in Tier 3. And these programs will not receive an additional equity adjustment. Also, all programs that have a CEO to educator compensation ratio of at least 30:1 will also be assigned to Tier 3, regardless of their location, CCFA participation, and the financial supports provided to families.
Thank you, Adrienne. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because it affects a very small number of the umbrella organizations operating in the state, although it is a significant number of programs. But we are working to understand and make decisions about how to implement the 1% cap required by the budget language that I referenced earlier. A review of our licensing data system lead identifies that there are 7 for-profit umbrella organizations that are potentially affected because they operate more than 10 sites in Massachusetts. And we are reviewing and understanding their level of C3 investment in these organizations to understand the implications of this. I think it's important to recognize here that this number does not include franchises. Franchises are not entered into LEAD as part of a larger umbrella, but they function as independent organizations, and we will simply maintain a requirement that is currently in place that the funding going to franchises is not used to calculate royalties to the franchisor for the licensing fees. So we will reach out directly to the 7 organizations that are affected by this and work with them directly on our plan going forward. So this slide provides a summary of all of the adjustments that we've proposed for FY25. I think we have discussed most of these. So there are a few further points that I want to call out. We've talked about how we set the base rate. We've talked about how we've adjusted per slot payments based on annual enrollment averages. We've also discussed how we are replacing the social vulnerability index that we have been using to date to shape the equity adjustments with the child opportunity index, as this is a more well-aligned index with our current work. We are also adjusting the CEO compensation ratio slightly. This is the ratio of compensation of the highest paid person in the organization, which could be a CEO on a multi-state, multi-site organization, for example, to the lowest paid educator at a particular site. If that ratio is above 30-1, those programs would not receive an equity adjustment, as Adrienne discussed. We have talked about working to understand how we'll apply funding cap, and again, we'll work with individual programs on that. One thing that I haven't really spoken about yet, but it is important for everybody to know, in service of providing stable funding to programs, we are going to set consistent C3 monthly payments. I will go through the timeline in a minute, but when this new formula starts, the inputs provided in the application, the information that you provide in the application will determine the C3 payment for that month, and that same payment will be given for every month through the end of this fiscal year, so through June. So everybody will know after the formula falls into place, how much to expect in payment for the rest of the fiscal year. We do also currently have a process whereby we allow newly licensed programs to enter this program quarterly. So you are not automatically enrolled in C3 or have the opportunity to apply for C3, but every quarter we have the option to open up the program to new providers. So far, we have done this every quarter and plan to continue to, but this does allow us the opportunity to pause on this process if we find that our expenditures are higher than expected. And also just calling out, we will continue some administrative changes that we have already put in place. We currently have quarterly deadlines for recertification. Recertification is a monthly process and will continue to be a monthly process. But programs have some flexibility in terms of when they submit the recertification. But we will continue a process whereby at the end of a quarter, all 3 months recertification from that quarter need to be submitted before the end of the quarter. After the quarter ends, no further recertifications for those months will be accepted, and there will be no payment for those months. We are also going to add into the administrative process a question about a program's willingness to engage in a voucher agreement if a family with a childcare financial assistance comes to them and seeks enrollment and the program has an opening. This is a requirement for FY26 based on the budget language. It is not a requirement in FY25, but we do want to understand the impact that this requirement will have on the field. And finally, the implementation timeline. We're currently in September and we are working to finalize the model and the formula and to share the information about where we're going with our board, which we did last week, and with the field. Payments continue based on the funding structure that we started in May and June and have continued to date. The September payment will be based on the same structure. We will continue throughout all of the whole fiscal year, the quarterly process of admitting new programs. In October, the payment will remain on the May and June funding structure. We will not change the payment on the formula in October, but we are updating the application to collect additional information from everybody so that we will have all the information collected in October that is needed for the new formula. This will help everybody understand what information we are collecting and what will be involved in applying in November, and give us some estimates to check our own estimates that we use to um, develop the formula. We will also provide programs with information as soon as we have it about what they can expect their monthly grant award to look like in the future. But to be clear, we will not be setting payments based on the information provided in October. This will just be an opportunity for everybody to take a first pass at what the new formula will require and provide initial information. In November, we will launch a fully revised application, and here we will be collecting all the information that is needed for the new formula, and payments will be set based on the information submitted in the November application. And those payments will remain the same month to month until June. At the same time, we are also restructuring the recertification process to simplify it and focus only on the information that we need for some of the annual averages, like annual enrollment averages that we need to sustain the formula. Programs will need to recertify and verify that they are open and serving children, as they always have, and then they will be paid. But again, the payment will not change based on the information submitted in the recertification. It's creating a history that we'll use in the future when we do adjust the grant awards in another year. We will also have a process in place whereby we will go to the board at the end of the fiscal year to discuss any changes that we are proposing and get board approval for any changes proposed for the following fiscal year. We are also keeping on our website at mass.gov/C3 the most up-to-date information on C3, the resources to support programs, and opportunities to learn more and share feedback. So I encourage everyone to visit that website to keep up to date on what is happening with C3. Thank you very much for your time and attention.